Hi everyone, my name is Jack, and today we're going to take a look at another horrific case with you. The Rachel O'Reilly case, one of Ireland's most violent crimes. When a person disappears without a trace or dies in mysterious circumstances, usually the other half is among the main suspects. Unfortunately, in about 80% of cases, suspicions are justified. In such crimes, there is usually not even a clear motive. And the crime itself has been defined as domestic, as if it were something ordinary. In the early 2000s, the high-profile case of Rachel O'Reilly literally shocked the whole of Ireland with its unprecedented cruelty and cold-bloodedness. A young woman and mother of 2 young children was brutally murdered in her own home, and police officers who arrived on the scene admitted that they had never in their practice encountered such a horrific crime scene. To solve this mystery and put all the pieces of the puzzle together, it took investigators several years of painstaking work. All this time, the criminal remained at large, confident that his guilt would never be proven. Perhaps it would have happened, but the killer was let down by his own vanity. Well, let's take the whole story from the beginning. Rachel O'Reilly, born Rachel Kahler in 1974, had a start in life that was marked by both challenge and love. Born on the northern outskirts of County Dublin, Ireland, she never knew her biological parents. She was adopted at a very young age by Rose and Jim Kahler, a couple who, unable to have biological children of their own, dedicated themselves to raising a family through adoption. Rachel was one of 5 adopted children in the Kahler household, and she grew up in a warm, supportive environment where she was cherished deeply by her parents. Rachel was an active and ambitious child, displaying a keen intellect and a love for sports from a young age. She excelled academically, showing particular aptitude in subjects that required analytical thinking and creativity. Her dedication to her studies was paralleled by her passion for athletics, particularly softball, where she not only participated but also stood out. Rachel's commitment to her team and her sport led her to participate in numerous competitions, and she even set several local records. Her achievements in softball were a source of pride for her family and community, showcasing her determination and skill. Rachel's personality was marked by her warmth, kindness, and sociability. She was known for her open and friendly nature, easily making friends and avoiding conflicts. Those who knew Rachel often described her as someone who radiated positivity and kindness, making her a beloved figure in her community. Her close relationship with her adoptive mother, Rose, was particularly significant. Rachel and Rose shared a deep bond, characterized by mutual respect and affection. Rose was not only a mother, but also a confidant and mentor to Rachel, providing guidance and support throughout her life. This strong maternal connection was a cornerstone of Rachel's personal development and well-being. After completing high school, Rachel pursued higher education by enrolling in a local university to study marketing. During her university years, she continued to work part-time as a salesperson in a department store, balancing her academic pursuits with her professional and athletic commitments. It was at this department store where Rachel's path crossed with Joe O'Reilly's, setting the stage for a relationship that would significantly impact her life. Joe, who was working as a manager in the same store, was immediately taken with Rachel's charm and resilience. Initially, Rachel was indifferent to Joe's advances, but his persistent efforts, including showering her with compliments and gifts, eventually won her over. Their relationship progressed rapidly, with Joe demonstrating his dedication through grand gestures, such as organizing a surprise trip to Paris and proposing to Rachel on top of the Eiffel Tower. Rachel, feeling she had met her Prince Charming, accepted his proposal, and they married a few years later. As a married couple, Rachel and Joe settled into a life that seemed idyllic from the outside. They moved to the serene and picturesque village of Nowell in the Scottish province, where they bought a spacious, cozy home, perfect for raising their 2 young sons. Rachel embraced her role as a mother with enthusiasm and devotion, focusing on creating a nurturing and loving environment for her children. While Joe continued to work in outdoor advertising, Rachel sought ways to contribute to the family income without compromising her responsibilities at home. She became a distributor for a popular cosmetics company and sold household goods, allowing her to interact more with her neighbors and become an integral part of the community. Her neighbors admired her for her dedication to her family and her kind-hearted nature, reinforcing the positive image she had built throughout her life. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, cracks began to appear. Joe's behavior towards Rachel changed over time, growing increasingly distant and erratic. He spent more time away from home, citing work commitments, and their once strong relationship started to deteriorate. Despite these challenges, Rachel remained committed to her family, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy and stability for the sake of her children. In summary, Rachel O'Reilly's life was a tapestry of love, achievement, and resilience. From her early days as an adopted child in a loving family to her academic and athletic successes, and later her role as a devoted mother and community member, Rachel's story is one of strength and dedication. Her tragic end stands in stark contrast to the vibrant and positive life she led, making her story all the more poignant and significant in the annals of Ireland's crime history. Joe O'Reilly was born in Dublin, Ireland in 1971 into a working-class family. He was the youngest of 3 children and grew up in a modest home where financial struggles were a constant challenge. His father worked as a manual laborer, while his mother took on various cleaning jobs to help make ends meet. Despite the financial difficulties, Joe's parents were determined to provide their children with a stable upbringing. Joe was an average student, more interested in practical pursuits than academics. He had a knack for fixing things and a natural charm that made him popular among his peers. After completing his secondary education, Joe decided against pursuing higher education and instead took on a series of odd jobs. He eventually found his niche in sales, where his persuasive skills and outgoing personality served him well. Joe's life took a significant turn when he met Rachel Kahler. It was the early 1990s, and both were working at a department store in Dublin, Joe as a manager and Rachel as a part-time salesperson. Rachel, with her striking looks, warm personality, and athletic build, quickly caught Joe's eye. He was immediately attracted to her, and his persistent efforts to win her over eventually paid off. Rachel, who initially viewed Joe's advances with indifference, began to see his charm and determination. Joe was relentless in his pursuit, showering Rachel with compliments, small gifts, and thoughtful gestures. His persistence and the grand romantic gestures he employed, like organizing surprise trips and elaborate dates, eventually won her over. Their relationship blossomed, marked by a whirlwind romance that captivated their friends and families. Joe and Rachel's relationship progressed rapidly. Within a few years of meeting, Joe proposed to Rachel in one of the most romantic settings imaginable, atop the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Rachel, swept off her feet by the grand gesture, accepted his proposal, and the couple married in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by family and friends. After their wedding, Joe and Rachel settled into a seemingly idyllic life. They moved to Nowell, a picturesque village in County Dublin, where they bought a spacious and cozy home. The move marked the beginning of their family life, and soon they welcomed 2 sons into their world. Rachel embraced motherhood with enthusiasm, dedicating herself to creating a loving and nurturing environment for their children. Joe continued his career in sales, eventually moving into outdoor advertising. His job required frequent travel, which meant he was often away from home. Rachel, on the other hand, found ways to contribute to the family income without compromising her responsibilities as a mother. She became a distributor for a popular cosmetics company and sold household goods, allowing her to interact with neighbors and become an integral part of the local community. Despite the pressures of Joe's job and the demands of raising 2 young children, their life in Nowell seemed perfect from the outside. Rachel was well-liked and respected in the community, known for her kindness and dedication to her family. Joe's charm and outgoing personality also made him popular among their neighbors. However, the seemingly perfect facade of their marriage began to show cracks over time. Joe's behavior towards Rachel grew increasingly distant and erratic. He spent more time away from home, citing work commitments, and their once strong relationship started to deteriorate. Rachel, ever the devoted mother and wife, tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the sake of their children, despite the growing tensions. In summary, Joe O'Reilly's life before meeting Rachel was marked by a humble upbringing and a series of jobs that eventually led him to a career in sales. His charm and persistence won Rachel's heart, leading to a marriage that initially seemed perfect. However, as time went on, underlying issues began to surface, foreshadowing the tragic events that would later unfold. Joe's story, intertwined with Rachel's, adds a complex layer to the narrative of one of Ireland's most infamous crime cases. In the weeks leading up to Rachel O'Reilly's murder, tensions within the O'Reilly household had been mounting. Joe O'Reilly's behavior had become increasingly erratic and distant. He frequently traveled for work, leaving Rachel to manage the household and care for their 2 young sons. Despite her efforts to maintain a semblance of normalcy, Rachel confided in close friends and family that she felt something was amiss in her marriage. Joe's absences and cold demeanor were unsettling, but Rachel remained committed to her family, hoping that things would eventually improve. On October 4th, 2004, the day before her murder, Rachel went about her usual routine. She spent the day caring for her children, running errands, and attending to household chores. Unbeknownst to her, Joe was meticulously planning her murder. He had taken steps to create an alibi for himself, ensuring that his actions would not immediately arouse suspicion. The stage was set for a crime that would shock the nation. On the morning of October 5th, 2004, Rachel O'Reilly was brutally murdered in her home in Nowell, County Dublin. Joe O'Reilly left the house early that morning, ostensibly to go to work. He dropped their sons off at school before heading to his office, where he made sure to be seen by colleagues, thereby establishing an alibi. Rachel remained at home, unaware of the danger that awaited her. Shortly after Joe left, she received a phone call from him, ostensibly checking in on her and making sure she was at home. This call would later be a crucial piece of evidence, as it helped to establish the timeline of events. Rachel's mother, Rose Kahler, discovered the crime scene later that day. Growing concerned when she couldn't reach Rachel by phone, Rose decided to visit her daughter's house. As she approached the front door, she noticed it was slightly ajar, which immediately raised her suspicions. Upon entering the house, Rose was met with a scene of unimaginable horror. Rachel's lifeless body lay on the floor of the bedroom, surrounded by a pool of blood. The room showed signs of a violent struggle. Rachel had been viciously beaten, with multiple blunt force trauma injuries to her head and face. Blood splatter on the walls and ceiling indicated the ferocity of the attack. The sight of her daughter's brutalized body was a devastating blow to Rose, who immediately called the police, her voice shaking with panic and disbelief. The Gardaí, Irish police, arrived at the scene shortly after Rose's distress call. They quickly secured the area and began a preliminary investigation. Initial observations indicated that Rachel's death was a result of a brutal, sustained attack. The nature of the injuries suggested a crime of passion, possibly committed by someone known to the victim. However, there were no immediate signs of forced entry or theft, which made the motive unclear. As the investigation began, Joe O'Reilly's behavior drew the attention of the authorities. He arrived at the scene after being notified by Rose and appeared visibly shaken. However, his reaction seemed inconsistent, displaying a level of composure that struck some as unnatural given the circumstances. He repeatedly asked questions about the investigation and the state of the crime scene, which was noted by detectives. In the days following the murder, Joe's actions raised further suspicions. He gave several media interviews, appearing composed and articulate, a stark contrast to the grief-stricken demeanor expected from a bereaved husband. His willingness to engage with the press and his detailed knowledge of the crime scene, despite not having been there during the initial investigation, were particularly concerning to the investigators. Joe also made several attempts to contact Rose and other family members, offering to help with funeral arrangements and expressing his desire to support the family through their loss. While these actions could be seen as those of a caring husband, they also served to keep him close to the investigation and maintain a semblance of normalcy. As the investigation progressed, the Gardaí began to piece together the events leading up to Rachel's murder. Forensic evidence, coupled with witness statements and Joe's own inconsistent behavior, began to paint a picture of a meticulously planned crime. It became increasingly clear that Joe O'Reilly was not the grieving husband he portrayed himself to be, but rather the prime suspect in a cold-blooded murder. In summary, the events leading up to the day of Rachel O'Reilly's murder were marked by increasing tension and suspicion within the O'Reilly household. The discovery of her body by her mother, Rose, was a harrowing moment that set off a detailed police investigation. Joe O'Reilly's immediate response and subsequent behavior only added to the suspicions, ultimately leading to a deeper inquiry into his involvement in the crime. In the immediate aftermath of Rachel O'Reilly's murder, Joe O'Reilly presented a seemingly airtight alibi. On the morning of October 5th, 2004, he had dropped off their children at school and proceeded to his workplace, where he made sure to be visible to his colleagues throughout the day. This alibi was intended to place him far from the scene of the crime at the critical time, thereby diverting suspicion away from him. However, as the Gardaí began to delve deeper into the details, doubts started to emerge about Joe's narrative. The phone records revealed a curious detail. Joe had called Rachel from his workplace, ostensibly to check in on her. This call, placed at a critical time, was later scrutinized for its purpose and timing, raising questions about Joe's true whereabouts. Furthermore, Joe's demeanor and behavior raised red flags for the investigators. His reaction to Rachel's death, both at the crime scene and in subsequent media interviews, struck many as incongruous with the expected emotional response of a grieving husband. His calmness, composure, and willingness to speak to the press seemed more in line with someone managing a facade rather than someone devastated by loss. This discrepancy prompted the Gardaí to look beyond the surface of Joe's alibi and examine his actions more closely. As the investigation progressed, several pieces of evidence began to undermine the initial assumption that Rachel's murder was the result of a random robbery gone wrong. The crime scene itself showed signs that were inconsistent with a typical burglary. There was no evidence of forced entry, and valuable items, such as jewelry and electronics, were left untouched. This lack of theft suggested that the primary motive was not robbery. Moreover, forensic analysis of the crime scene revealed crucial details. Blood spatter patterns and the nature of Rachel's injuries indicated a prolonged and violent struggle, pointing to an assailant who had a deep personal connection to the victim. The savagery of the attack suggested a crime driven by intense emotion, further contradicting the theory of a random break-in. During the search of the O'Reilly home, investigators discovered several items that raised suspicions about Joe's involvement. Among these was a pair of blood-stained shoes hidden in the attic, which forensic analysis later confirmed belonged to Joe and had Rachel's blood on them. Additionally, investigators found discrepancies in Joe's statements and behaviors that did not align with the evidence collected. One significant piece of evidence was a set of CCTV recordings from Joe's workplace and other locations that tracked his movements on the day of the murder. These recordings contradicted Joe's account of his activities and suggested he had the opportunity to return home undetected to commit the crime. Further scrutiny of Joe's phone records showed inconsistencies that questioned his stated timeline. The calls he made to Rachel from work were part of a pattern intended to establish his presence at his office, yet the timing and nature of these calls seemed orchestrated rather than natural. As these pieces of evidence accumulated, the Gardaí began to build a compelling case against Joe O'Reilly. The combination of forensic findings, inconsistencies in Joe's alibi, and his suspicious behavior painted a damning picture. What initially appeared to be a tragic and senseless killing was increasingly revealed to be a calculated act of domestic violence, meticulously planned and executed by someone who thought he could outsmart the system. In summary, Joe O'Reilly's initial alibi and the subsequent discovery of suspicious items and inconsistencies in the robbery theory significantly shifted the focus of the investigation. The mounting evidence against Joe, coupled with his unusual behavior and the forensic details of the crime scene, led the Gardaí to conclude that Rachel's murder was not a random act of violence, but a premeditated crime committed by her own husband. In the days and weeks following Rachel O'Reilly's murder, Joe O'Reilly's behavior came under intense scrutiny. From the moment Rachel's body was discovered, Joe's reaction was perceived by many as unusually detached. Instead of displaying the grief and shock typical of someone who had just lost their spouse in a violent crime, Joe seemed composed and calculated. This demeanor raised eyebrows not only among investigators, but also within the community. Joe's interaction with the media also fueled suspicions. He readily agreed to participate in television interviews, projecting an image of a grieving husband eager to find his wife's killer. During these interviews, his calm and methodical explanations seemed out of place given the tragic circumstances. This public performance, intended to garner sympathy and direct the focus away from himself, ultimately had the opposite effect, casting further doubt on his innocence. As part of the investigation, the Gardaí meticulously examined Joe's electronic communications. His emails and phone records provided crucial insights into his state of mind and his activities leading up to and following Rachel's murder. These digital traces revealed a complex web of deceit and manipulation. One of the most damning pieces of evidence was found in Joe's email correspondence. Investigators discovered exchanges between Joe and a woman named Nikki Pelly, with whom Joe was having an affair. These emails were not just casual or flirtatious, they detailed plans for a future together, implying that Joe was envisioning a life without Rachel. The tone of these communications contrasted sharply with Joe's public persona of a devastated widower. Additionally, Forensic analysis of Joe's phone revealed that he had been in contact with Nikki Pelly on the day of the murder. The timing of these communications was suspicious, as they coincided with key moments when Joe claimed to be occupied with work or other activities. This connection between Joe's timeline and his secret communications with his mistress further eroded his credibility. As the investigation progressed, interviews with Joe's colleagues and his mistress, Nikki Pelly, provided more context and evidence. Colleagues at Joe's workplace described his behavior on the day of the murder as unusually composed. Despite the tragic news of his wife's death, Joe did not exhibit the level of distress one would expect. Some colleagues even noted that Joe seemed to be managing his work and interactions with an almost clinical detachment, which was highly suspicious given the circumstances. Nikki Pelly's interviews were particularly revealing. Initially, Nikki maintained that her relationship with Joe was innocent and downplayed the seriousness of their affair. However, under closer questioning, inconsistencies in her statements began to emerge. The intimate and forward-looking nature of her communications with Joe, combined with the timing of their interactions, suggested a much deeper involvement than she initially admitted. Nikki eventually revealed more details about her relationship with Joe. She admitted that they had discussed being together in the future, which implied that Joe had considered the possibility of Rachel being out of the picture. This revelation was critical, as it established a potential motive for Joe, the desire to eliminate Rachel to pave the way for a new life with Nikki. The combination of Joe's detached reaction, the incriminating emails and phone records, and the testimonies from colleagues and Nikki Pelly painted a damning picture. Joe's behavior and communications did not align with that of an innocent man grieving his wife's tragic death. Instead, they suggested premeditation and a callous disregard for the life he had taken. In summary, Joe O'Reilly's reaction to Rachel's death, coupled with the examination of his emails and communications, and the interviews with his colleagues and mistress, exposed a calculated and manipulative individual. The evidence gathered from these sources reinforced the growing belief among investigators that Joe was not just the prime suspect, but indeed the perpetrator of this heinous crime. The Rachel O'Reilly case stands as a stark reminder of the devastating impact of domestic violence and the lengths to which perpetrators will go to conceal their crimes. Rachel's brutal murder at the hands of her husband, Joe O'Reilly, shocked the entire nation of Ireland and sparked widespread outrage and disbelief. The meticulous investigation that followed uncovered a web of lies, deceit, and betrayal, ultimately leading to Joe's conviction for the murder of his wife. This case holds significant implications for both law enforcement and society as a whole. It underscores the importance of thorough and diligent police work in unraveling complex crimes, particularly those perpetrated within the confines of the home. It also highlights the need for greater awareness and understanding of the dynamics of domestic violence, as well as the critical role of early intervention and support for victims. The pursuit of justice for victims of domestic violence is paramount in combating this pervasive societal issue. Rachel O'Reilly's tragic death serves as a poignant reminder of the countless individuals who have suffered and continue to suffer in silence at the hands of their abusers. By holding perpetrators accountable for their actions and ensuring they face the full consequences of the law, we send a powerful message that domestic violence will not be tolerated. Furthermore, justice for victims extends beyond the courtroom. It encompasses providing support, resources, and protection to survivors as they rebuild their lives in the aftermath of abuse. It requires challenging societal attitudes and norms that perpetuate violence and discrimination against women and marginalized communities. Only through a concerted effort to address the root causes of domestic violence can we hope to create a safer and more equitable world for all.